I think that feminism, first of all, arose because of male authority, upholding male authority over women and the oppression of women. And as long as the oppression of women still exists, then you still need feminism, and that's how it's going to be, because we still have to fight for the rights of women to be treated equally, to be given equal opportunities, to be given the same rights as men. I think that gender equality should not be seen as a standalone objective. It has to be infused in many other goals and issues. If you're talking about, whether you're talking about climate change, you're talking about poverty, you're talking about education, you're talking about peace and security, we have to find ways to make gender indicators and gender goals under those several goals. So we can't just say gender is something that stands alone. It must be embedded, and that's the problem we've had in the last decade or 2 decades, that we have seen women empowerment being fronted as something, as islands. So in the end, you have women empowerment programs, but actually women are just put on the side to talk to themselves. Yes, you can get a bit out of that, but then sidelining women when it comes to the main table, to the main issues, that continued marginalization of women still exists. So we need to be able to tackle systems of oppression, patriarchy, looking at how capitalism is excluding women, and trying to revisit that. So we can't just say gender equality is a standalone point. We must find the points of oppression and look for how women can be included and also rewarded for what they produce. I think what we face as women, as young women, black women, whether in Africa or around the world, is that there are so many multiple layers of oppression that we have to deal with. Not only patriarchy, but also the globalized world. And when a black woman comes to Europe, she has to face a different kind of oppression, which is racial issues exist against immigrants, against different populations. So we need to see this conversation, not just for Africa, but also what happens in Germany, that there's a link between the different injustices around the world. It's not just confined within Africa, that when I come to Germany, I'm a black woman in Germany and I experience certain violence, and it's very important to address the systemic violence within Germany, and then we can also do that at home. But that said, that we have historical injustices also given our colonial background, the colonization that happened. We need to make investments to decolonize our education, to make sure we give opportunities to women, and remove barriers that stand in the way of women, but also remove barriers that stand in the way of goods, African goods. We can't talk about movement of African goods without talking about the movement of African people, both within the continent and to be able to go outside the continent. So the idea is not to confine Africans in Africa, but actually to give Africans more opportunities to go wherever they would want to go. But most important, to create those opportunities at home, that they don't have to go outside Africa in a desperation, but rather in trying to look for further opportunities. So we must invest in African bodies. There are different economic blocs that are doing a few things. We have the trade agreement with all African countries. We must boost that trade and build systems so that African countries can trade within each other, because we had stuff to sell, but also remove restrictions on Europe, because we are so close to Europe, yet we are so far, and we don't get to export much here. So we need to see those trade agreements actually being fairer. We need to work on the fairness of the trade agreements, because ultimately when you suppress countries, least developed countries, you are suppressing the women in those countries.